points that the Deputy
Thank you very
raised.
much. Deputy O'Sullivan.
Thank you very much for the report. I think from both being a member of this committee and heading the Irish section of AWAPA, which has involved me in going to a number of African countries, there's absolutely no doubt the high regard with which Ireland is held. And sometimes I don't think we capitalise on that enough. And I think it has come from a variety of sources, the department, I think the NGOs who are doing amazing work, the missionaries who, who forged the trail initially, and I'd also mention our ambassadors, who are certainly the ambassadors I've met from Lesotho and Nigeria are very much hands-on, and they're actively involved in what's going on. So I think they've really enhanced Ireland's reputation. I want to support what Deputy Smith has been saying about human rights being at the centre, and I welcome, excuse me, what you have said there now, that development and human rights will go together. I'm just looking at one in particular, and it's the right to decent work. And, you know, we've seen there's historical patterns of exploitation of workers down through the centuries. And particularly, I'm looking at Africa, the growing of certain industries. Okay, we have the extractive ones, but there are others, you know, there's going to be massive growth in agricultural production, etc., etc. I do think that, you know, we can use our position because we're in there, in those countries, they're listening to us, that we can really put the right to decent work and labour conditions and pay, etc., and health and safety on the agendas there. And I would love to see Ireland playing that bigger role. It always strikes me the disconnect between what's written on paper about rights, that is agreed to by all of the countries, and yet we see that these are the countries who are abusing those rights. And again, I think, you know, we can be a strong voice there. I want to just mention Colombia in particular. And, you know, looking at you know, our policies that, you know, we want to defend civil society space, we defended a resolution on reprisals against human rights activists. And yes, there are massive abuses of civil society in Colombia, in particular of trade unionists and the farmers and those people who are trying to organise. And just today we had word of another murder, Cesar Garcia, an environmental activist, a farmer, murdered in front of his children. And that's going to go unpunished, we know that. There was a report of a particular community who had been displaced. Under the Santos administration, they were allowed to go back. They've been further displaced. And again, I think we can say more than we have been. Another trade unionist, Huber, his surname escapes me at the moment, is in jail at the moment for doing what in Western society we do all the time. We speak out and we make our voices heard. So therefore I think a start between the decent work and the civil society space and the trade unionists, I think any trade agreement has to include a clause on the guarantee of respect for human rights. That's that one. On the gender issue, child brides, I mean, it's still a massive issue. It's gross exploitation. I mean, children have been taken forcibly from families into this situation. And again, is a part of the gender debate that you have. And I know we've spoken about Syria. I'm just asking, will Ireland support the idea of humanitarian corridors that both sides could respect so that humanitarian aid can get in to where it is most needed? So I think they're my particular questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Humanitarian corridors in Syria, child brides, Colombia, and the question of decent work and labour conditions. I'll take it in the order that the Deputy made her comments. The question of labour conditions and indeed of decent work is an important one, and it's, as I said in response to the Deputy Smith's questions a few minutes ago, the development and human rights agendas are becoming closer together. And we're very conscious from an Irish Aid perspective that we need to be able to interact both in terms of our programmes but in terms of our policy interaction with our host countries or our partner countries. What we try and do is, through our dialogue, to encourage those countries to respect the human rights standards. Human rights standards don't change, but the situations which they apply to do. It's an ongoing dialogue. It's not always easy, I have to admit, with some countries in terms of ensuring that the very points that you have raised are respected. And I think it's something that we need to bear in mind, not just in the context of the 2015 agenda, post-2015 agenda that Deputy Smith has already mentioned, but also in terms of the implementation of the Irish Aid White Paper, which was produced earlier this year. I'm not an expert on Colombia, so I won't try to answer your points in particular detail, if you don't mind, Deputy, but we will write to you in this regard. The one thing I would say to you about having previously worked on that side is that we have always, in our various interactions, both publicly and privately with Colombia, raised our concerns, particularly about human rights defenders. And we are, I'm sure she won't mind me saying it, but Mary Lawler and other people, frontline defenders, are particularly active in putting pressure on us, legitimately so, in that regard, and we do try to deal with those representations as they arise. Child brides, again, in some ways this is a development question as much as a human rights question. You won't have development until the rights of children and the rights of women are respected. And part of an effective development scenario in any country is that children, as they're called, go to school and do not leave school at an early age. And the problem, of course, with child brides, particularly where there's an element of coercion, is that it causes us, it hinders the development. My colleague has just drawn my attention to a note here. On early child and forced marriage, it's a devastating human rights violation in itself, but also, as I said, has a multiplier effect as girls and women who are trapped in coerced marriages are deprived of their rights to education. It also raises issues in relation to SRHR, as you can imagine, and of course, unfortunately, it's also related to the FGM issue, which is a problem in some particular cultures. It's something we're keenly aware of, and it's one of the reasons why we've raised FGM in the UPR consultations. In the question of Syria on humanitarian corridors, I don't have a particular steer on that. Again, we write to the Deputy, but I'm quite confident in stating that anything that can be done to alleviate the appalling humanitarian situation in Syria, we would support. The first requirement is to try and bring about some kind of a peace process. But as I said earlier, the prospects of that in the shorter term are not particularly encouraging. Okay.